what we eat or what we drink, we need to be temperate in what we do. We need to just do enough and no more. That way we look after our bodies. In life, we need to be responsible for our actions. Others in our lives need to know where we are going and have people, others in our lives need to know what we're doing. And how often do we find people that want to sponge off us? And how do we allow them to do that? Do we allow them to do that? I feel sometimes I sponge off my good friends, the Hewitts. I turn up there quite often, and there's always breakfast. There's always a nice hot drink. And you'll say, no, look, I've had enough, but out comes more. So I don't really feel, Veronica, that I sponge, but that's fine. We need to be careful of people that do sponge off us. Does the Bible say anything about that? You know, should we be careful of people like that and set some boundaries so that they don't call every day of the week? Come with me to 2 Thessalonians. I found this quite an interesting little verse. 2 Thessalonians 3 and verses 7 to 10. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3 and verses 7 to 10. Therefore, brethren, in all our afflictions and distress, we were comforted concerning you by your faith. For now we live in you. For now we live, if you stand fast in the Lord. For what thanks can we render to God for you? For all the joy... Yes, it's the first. 2 Thessalonians, as I said before, get the right book, it makes a difference. 2 Thessalonians 3 and verse 7. For you yourselves know you ought to follow us, for we were not disorderly among you, nor did we eat anyone's bread free of charge, but worked with labour and toil night and day, that we might not be a burden to any one of you. So it is right that people don't sponge off us. We need to, if we allow them to, that's fine, but we need to make that decision. Am I happy with this person coming? Do they need to come because they can't afford to live any other way? But the Bible is clear that we should not allow people to just sponge off us needlessly. When we set boundaries, then people around us will know where they stand with us. Matthew 5 and verse 37 tells us when we're talking to people. Matthew 5. Matthew 5 and verse 37. Simply says, but let your yes be yes and your no be no. For whatever is more than these is from the evil one. So we need to know what we're going to say. We need to be able to say yes to things. We need to be able to say no to things. That's very clear. And the same sort of thing is mentioned in James 5 and verse 12, almost the same words. Let your yea be yea and your nay be nay. Listen to this quote. Boundaries define limits. Mark off dividing lines. The purpose of a boundary is to make clear separations between different turf or different territory. When we're talking about boundaries, sometimes people get the wrong ideas. So what are some of the myths of boundary setting? The first one, if I set boundaries, I'm being selfish. If I'm saying no to doing things, people interpret that as being selfish. If Sam was to come to me and ask me now to do a meeting this afternoon, I need to be able to say no and feel comfortable with that. Now, Sam wouldn't ask me to do that, I know, but we need to be comfortable, even in doing things in church, we need to be comfortable with saying no. So a myth is that I'm being selfish. Boundaries are a sign of disobedience. You do this, you do that, and you say, no, I'm not going to do that. It is not a sign of disobedience. It's a sign of looking after myself. If I set limits, I'm going to lose love. No, somebody might get upset, but you won't lose love. You will gain love because of it. If I set boundaries, I will hurt others. They may choose to be hurt by our decisions, but that's their problem. Boundaries mean I am angry. No. Boundaries set properly do not mean that I am angry. Just the reverse. I can tell you in a calm way what I will and won't do. That is not being angry. When others set boundaries, it injures. No, it might upset what they want to do, but they will live. But we might think to ourselves, but they have done so much for me, so, I should do it for them. Just remember, love is always a free gift. When you respond to love in guilty compliance, you are not being loving yourself. The other myth is that boundaries are permanent. No, they're not. We can change our boundaries if need be. If we don't like where the fence is, we can move it. Like in the Garden of Eden, there was a problem. God moved the boundaries from the tree to right outside the garden. Boundaries are not permanent. We can renegotiate them. So what are some of the laws of boundaries? We're going to go through a few of these. I'm not going to number them today because I might leave one out like I did last week. The first one is the law of sowing and reaping. In other words, the law of cause and effect. If I do this, this is going to happen. You know what I mean? The Bible calls it the law of sowing and reaping. You reap whatever you sow. If you sow to your own flesh, you will reap corruption from the flesh. But if you sow to the Spirit, you will reap eternal life from the Spirit. Interesting. When God tells us that we will reap what we sow, He is not punishing us. We might see it as punishment, but He is not punishing us. He's telling us how things really are. For instance, if you smoke, what's going to be the consequence? You'll end up with a bad cough, might even end up with lung cancer. If you overspend, you'll have the creditors come knocking on your door. Simple. There are so many other illustrations that if we do certain things, this is the reaction. We shouldn't be reaping what someone else is sowing. If someone is doing something and we're reaping the benefit of that, especially in a negative way, then there is something wrong. What they sow, they need to reap. If we are reaping what someone else is sowing, we need to set a boundary so that the reaping stays with them, not with us. In other words, make them responsible for their own actions. I should not feel guilty for actions of others. The next law, the law of responsibility. The law of responsibility includes loving others. The commandment to love is the entire law for Christians. Jesus calls it my commandment. Love each other as I have loved you. Anytime you are not loving others, you are not taking full responsibility for yourself. You have disowned your heart. Problems arise when boundaries or responsibilities are confused. We are to love one another, not to be one another. I can't feel your feelings for you. I can't think for you. I can't behave for you. The biblical mandate for our own personal growth is continue to work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you to will and to act according to His good pleasure. You are responsible for yourself. I am responsible for myself. Don't get me wrong, it doesn't mean we don't have God on our side, and our own salvation we can't do on our own, but it's our choice what we do about that salvation. What about the law of power? The Bible teaches that people must admit that they are moral failures. I am a sinner. Alcoholics admit that they are powerless over alcohol. They don't have the fruit of self-control. They are powerless over their addiction, much like Paul was. Paul said, I do not understand what I do, for what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate, I do. For what I do is not the good I want to do. Now, if you read that fast, you don't know what's going on, but it's basically saying, I don't like the things that I do, but Paul is admitting that he does do them, and we need to do the same. There are things in my life that I don't like doing, and until we admit that, we can't do anything about changing that.